All right, guys, welcome back to the Hoops Nerd Show. I'm excited to have this guest on today. I have not talked to someone from Salt City Hoops before, and I'm excited about it because they do great stuff over there at Salt City Hoops. Today, we're joined by Ken Clayton. You do great work over there writing for Salt City Hoops with Dan Clayton, your brother. I wanted to have, first off, welcome to the channel.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's a pretty big offseason for the Utah Jazz, and there's a lot of different avenues they can go this offseason. We heard from Danny Ainge at his end of season interview just how many different ways they can go. Basically, the plan is no plan. They're going to base the plan off of what happens. And so it's good to be very familiar with what's kind of possible for the Jazz with their cap. What can they do with Lauri Markkanen? And so I had Ken on because if you don't follow Ken on Twitter, you should, because he's great with kind of answering those questions about the cap. And honestly, I'll just tweet at you if I have a question. I'll just be like, what does Ken say about this?
That's my bat signal. Just tag me, and I usually come running.
Awesome. Yeah. So I appreciate you coming on. So, anyways, I wanted to dive in a little bit because the biggest decision for the Utah this offseason, it's probably the one. There's some options they can do, but the most likely scenario for Utah this offseason, at least based off of what they've told us, is that they're going to re-sign Lauri Markkanen. But Lauri Markkanen is under contract this season. It's honestly one of the most value contracts in the NBA. Lauri's making like 18 million this offseason. As he was an all-star last year. He was a borderline all-star this year. Incredible value, but he still is under contract. And so I guess my first question for you, Ken, is if you can explain what are the options for the Jazz this offseason with Lauri? I mean, can they renegotiate his contract? Can they just sign a new contract afterwards? What does it look like for them if they want to re-sign Lauri Markkanen?
Yeah. So I'll take you through probably not every option, because obviously there's literally an option. They could waive him and just pay him $6 million to go away. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So we won't waste time on things like that. So the first extension that they could do with him would be, and they could have already done with him, and it's a non-starter from his side, would be they could just give him a raise, not touch this coming season, but extend him 4 years, starting at 140% of his current salary. It's a non-starter from his perspective, because that would keep him at 18 million-ish this coming year, I should say, to be clear. And then the year after that, it would take him 25, 27, 29, 31 million. He would still be a value contract in the NBA in the year 2024 at those rates. So he's not, if they, at some point, they probably just threw it out there. Do you want to extend now? And it would have added 113 million to what he's already got on the books, that 18 million. And his agent, I'm sure, didn't even call Lauri to find out, said, no, we're not interested in that. We're looking for something bigger. So their question now is, do we let him play out this year and then go to unrestricted free agency and just sign him outright? Or, because they're an under the cap team, they do have the opportunity to do what's called a renegotiate and extend. So in one fell swoop, and this is what most of the chatter has been about from national people, local people, everybody, is that they will renegotiate that 18 million year for 2024-25, and then tack on, presumably, up to 4 more years on the end of that. Now that's all negotiation. Could he come back and say, oh, well, I only want to do 3 more years, or I only want to do 3 plus an option, or whatever? That's stuff they have to negotiate. So does that all make sense to that point?
Yeah, and so he'd be making more at that point, wouldn't he? So what would he be looking at money-wise if they just maxed him?
That's one option, is if they just took him up. I mean, they could take him up if they want to really burn this coming year's cap space. I don't think this is the option the team would be looking at, but if they want to, they could take him up to the max salary for next year, to 2024-25. They'd have to give him about 24 million in incremental salary in rough numbers. And then they could build the extension off of that. And his total, that would take him up to, then his years in the extension would be something like 46 million, 49 million, 52 million, 56 million. Okay. I,
That's why his agent's gonna say no to just like the other
yeah,
option.
for that other deal. Yeah, the other deal would have given him 113 million in new money. The deal I just talked about gives him 227 million in new money. You don't have to be a math major to know that. Take the 227 million. Now, that said, I don't think that's the max. That's the max the Jazz could give him, the max next year, and then building max raises, max extension, and max raises off of that. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what the Jazz are going to offer, nor, in my opinion, probably should they. There's probably going to be a happy medium thing. We've seen two of these deals happen in the last summer. We saw Jordan Clarkson get a renegotiate and extend, and his, if you remember, they took his 14 million up to 23 million for last season, and now they're dropping him back down the next 2 years to 14 and 14. Mm-hmm. I also don't expect that they'll do that with Lauri. There'll be something more generous than that. The other deal we saw last summer that was a renegotiate and extend was Domantas Sabonis. They took him up, but they didn't take him up like fully all the way to a maximum NBA allowed salary. They added about 9 million to his salary. His salary was a little higher than Lauri's to begin with. So they took him from 22, they added 8.6 and took him to about 31 million. And then they built the extension off of that, 40%. They might not have gone the full 40, but they went up from that. And now he's got a good, healthy contract, but it's not like a full on max. It's a little shy of what the maximum they could have given him. I think there'll be some middle ground here, because what the Jazz will want to do is they'll want to come to Lauri and say, hey, we want to give you this because we like you. We want to keep you around, but we also don't have to give you anything. So right now, because you're under contract, but if we give you this, give us a little bit, give us a little wiggle room on the back end somehow, whether that means declining salaries on the back end or just a little shy of the max. Because just my opinion, most teams are a little free with the maxes. If every team has 2 max contracts, that means there are 60 max players in the league. Mm-hmm. I've always felt like the math is a little funny on that, because I don't think there are 60 players in this league that are really truly worth a full max.
So, and that's what I was going to say. And the new CBA, isn't that basically, that's probably simplifying it a lot, but more or less, you're probably going to have, at this point, 2 max players on your roster?
I think so, because we're seeing already what's happening with teams like the Suns, who have 3 and don't really have a great avenue to get rid of the third. If they tried, after 1 year with Beal, I'm sure if they could, they might explore that, but they're not. They're probably not going to, because they can't. And it's really hamstringing everything they're doing. Losing the ability to trade draft picks. You can't trade cash. You can't aggregate salaries. You can't do all that stuff. The second apron. Teams, if they have 3 max salaries, will automatically be in the second apron. So they better be ready to go to the conference finals or the finals if they're going to do that to their future prospects.
Yeah, and I guess, and Jazz fans are probably hearing, 56 million for Lauri Markkanen. Even me, it's like, it's a little eyebrow raising, but the cap is raising. And I think, the thing everyone always talks about as well, it's probably better to look at it as a percentage though. But in your opinion, I don't know if the question is right to just say, is he worth it? But can the Jazz do other things that kind of can, because we've heard Danny Ainge mention he wants to go big game hunting. He wants to go out and get this other star. How hard is that going to be if they give Lauri Markkanen this kind of renegotiate with a near max, if they do that? Well,
my guess would be that if there was really a star on the phone, pick a name.
Let's say Giannis, who just got eliminated, is like, I want out, something like that.
So Giannis, first of all, you got to trade for him. So that actually works for you a little bit. So you can tell Milwaukee, well, we're not taking him fully into cap space. We're going to send you John Collins and something else along with a bevy of picks. So I know I asked you to provide a name, but I'm going to change it. I'm going to pull the carpet out from under and say, because let's say it's a free agent where you can't, where you have to sign him. So let's say this summer, probably the top free agent that we know of right now is Paul George. So PG, and I don't expect this. nobody aggregate this and say the Jazz might get Paul George. But
Well, if
if
I'd
Paul George
aggregating
is
it,
on
I would be aggregating
the,
myself, I guess. So
yeah, yeah. So if Paul George calls up and says, I always have really loved Salt Lake City,
yeah,
I've had some, the fans there are great, whatever. I'd be interested in coming. Then they've got to kind of figure out. They've either got to tell him no. I mean, and this is just completely made up fantasy land anyway.
yeah,
But they've either got to tell him no, or they got to go to Lauri and say, hey, we've got a guy on the phone, whether it's Paul George or we got a way to trade for Giannis or we got to do this. But if we do that, we won't have the cap space anymore to renegotiate you, and you're going to have to play this year at 18 and go to unrestricted free agency that year. So the Jazz would have to balance, the long-term prospect of that other guy, whoever that was, and
yeah.
say, is this worth doing this, because we will be risking losing Lauri in a year because we think he's happy today, but a year down the road, could he say, you know what, so and so has money and I'm going to go, and they just made me a huge offer, I'm going to go play for them. So there's room to do both, but if you really take on a full on to try to take on a full on max salary, which they probably can't quite fit in a max salary, but if somebody was willing to come in if they cleared the bench, somebody was willing to come in for 35 or 40, they then would lose the flexibility to renegotiate and extend. And then all they could do is they could still do that first option, which is the extension at 140%. Lowry's going to say no.
Mm-hmm.
So then they would say unrestricted free agency in 2025.
And that's probably why, I mean, it's like you said, it's never say never. I mean, if they want to go out and get a free agent, they can, but it
Yeah.
does make it harder because they have to figure out the Lauri Markkanen situation. And that's probably why we hear so much about the Jazz wanting to make a trade. And it's probably why that's just the avenue. I know a lot of people are really hoping that, somehow the Dallas Mavericks decide that they want to trade Luka Doncic to the Jazz. I personally don't know if so. I mean, what are your thoughts on something like that? Does that seem like a possibility? Is that something that you think they can even do?
I mean, yeah, they could do it, but it all hinges on Luka has to be so unhappy, or player X has to be so unhappy that they say, I want to go. And then for whatever reason, when they make that list, and teams don't have to stick with the list. We saw Dame go to Milwaukee, and Donovan went to Cleveland. When they make that list, either Utah's got to be on it, or the team just has to say, hey, screw it. The Utah's is offering us 6 draft picks, so we're going to take it anyway and let them deal with the fact that he didn't want to go there to begin with. So my opinion on Luka specifically is things would have to crash and burn in Dallas probably more than they did this year. Even if they're a first round loser at this stage, given where this season went, I think they probably bought themselves another year, and he's not gonna, ask out this year. So 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, but then the Jazz probably don't have cap space by then. But they could,
Yeah,
if they still have enough picks, then maybe, you never know.
yeah. I mean, it's obviously not out of the question. I've just been around long enough that it's like when we had Karl Malone back in the day. There were negotiation issues that went on, but they figured them out. And
Yeah.
when you have that MVP caliber guy, you're doing absolutely everything you can to keep that guy. So I just think that's why it's not a never say never, but kind
Yeah.
of a long shot for something like that to actually come to fruition.
Yeah.
So that's kind of door number one. And I actually do think, well, I guess I don't want to leave it just yet. I just want to get your opinion. I mean, the Jazz have the last 2 seasons, they've basically kind of been Groundhog Day the last 2 seasons. They play kind of 500-ish ball up until trade deadline, and then they realize, we're just not that good. Let's trade some players, rest our stars. Let's see how good a draft pick we can get. And they've honestly done that. They ended last year at 9. This year they ended at 8. To me, I just think that the Jazz have to make a decision of what they want to do next year, because I don't think the best plan for Utah is to be, and maybe you disagree, but being in that 8 to 12 range in the draft, kind of playing for that play-in spot, I don't feel like that's probably the best move for the Jazz long term. I just think, especially next year, it's a good draft. You're playing with fire with OKC, because that's the other thing the Jazz kind of have going right now is they don't own their pick next year unless they're bottom 10. And if they don't convey it next year, then it goes to bottom 8. So what are your thoughts? I mean, can the Jazz somehow play both sides of the coin by signing Lauri Markkanen? And then, I mean, Danny Ainge said he thinks they're not that far away. What are your thoughts? Are the Jazz on a trajectory right now if they're re-signing Lauri Markkanen to make the playoffs? Or do they need to maybe consider trading Lauri Markkanen? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't
That's a
think
loaded
that.
question.
Yeah, no, I know. I don't think that they have in their plans as of May 2nd that they're planning to trade Lauri Markkanen. Um, I think I think they want to keep Lauri Markkanen long term. Um, I don't know exactly. The intriguing thing in Danny Ainge's press conference that he gave was the whole, we're trying to add players, we're trying to get better, we're not that far away, but if nothing works out for us in July, then we might have to pivot. And to me, that sounded like that pivot was going to come earlier than February. Um, but I don't know exactly how you get there if you do have Lowry on the roster. That said, I don't really think they are entertaining at this point the idea of trading Lowry. So I don't know how those two things go together. Um, Maybe they can play Lowry all season, but you've taken away. The first season we talked about, they left Mike Conley on the roster, and they had a couple other veterans that weren't great, but Malik Beasley filled a role for a while, and Vando filled a role for a while. And then this past season, it was probably primarily Kelly Olynyk and to a lesser extent Simone that were giving them some guys to help that kept them. They weren't a winning team; they were a 500 team, but they were good enough to keep us thinking, oh, well, maybe they are. People were confused anyway. Maybe if they're playing Lowry and a whole bunch of young guys, maybe they're more in a 4, 5, 6 range versus an 8, 9 range, which is where we've seen them.
Yeah.
And then if you pull the plug when you're in the 4, 5, 6 range, you can maybe slide in. Late in the season, you can probably slide into a 2 or 3. I mean, with the draft odds these days, you don't have to be the absolute worst team to have the best to have the same odds of getting that number one pick. The bottom 3 have the same exact odds, and the fourth is pretty close. So I don't know. I don't see a very realistic scenario where they trade Lowry, but they've always said if that grandfather, well, not they, but people who talk to the team say if there's a grandfather offer that comes in, we're going to talk about it because that's what you have to do. I mean, that's what happened with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. So eventually you say, well, we have to look at this offer because we're getting X picks and X swaps and these two guys that we think are okay or whatever. So eventually you look at it, but I don't think that's plan A, B, or C on the Jazz radar right now.
Yeah. No, and I actually, you talking about that, it does make sense. I guess for me, it's like, and honestly, I wonder if Lauri Markkanen would be fine with a scenario like that. I mean, the last few days on his Instagram, he's posting pictures of hiking in Utah, and all the rumors are that he loves Utah. And
Yeah.
so, and you listen to national guys talk about it. You don't want to just lose Lauri Markkanen just for the sake of it. I mean, that's why, some people that were so mad about the Jazz during the Wembanyama year, they should have traded everything and just bottomed out. And to some extent, I understand and I agree. But at the same time, so did Houston, so did Detroit, and they got jumped. And Danny Ainge, he did that in Boston. In his press conference, he talked about how the plan was Kevin Durant that one year. And then they got jumped by like 2 or 3 teams. And I think he remembers that pretty well. And that's pretty painful to lose everything and then not even get the guy.
Yeah.
And so I do like that idea where I think the smartest thing is to re-sign renegotiate with Lauri Markkanen, sign him. But then it's kind of is Lauri Markkanen up for the pain tolerance of a season like that? And if he is, that's perfect. because if you're going into the draft in the 5-ish range, and they're willing to pull the plug, that's the best of both worlds, in my opinion. Because then I do think the Jazz just need more talent. I mean, they really are at a crossroads. They've got Lauri Markkanen, who's in his prime, and then they've just got young players and honestly G League players that are trying to make the roster. And so, yeah, is that what you think they are going to do, or do you think they are going to find someone to because sorry, one more thing, and I'm yammering, but the thing that I noticed this year is because I actually thought when they traded at trade deadline, I thought, Keontae's shown a lot of moments, and Taylor Hendricks, we've seen him knock down threes and he plays good defense. Maybe this team will be pretty decent and they'll convey the pick, and then they don't have to worry next year and the following year about that. And then we saw them completely just bottom out and lose like 13 in a row. And I do think those veterans bring kind of a stability. Like, I don't think Jordan Clarkson is this elite player, but he does bring some stability when he's on the floor. You don't have quite as many just kind of those rookie mistakes when you have someone else on the floor that's kind of helping keep things flowing. But anyways, what do you think what is your prediction? Do you think that's kind of what they'll be doing, or what do you think what they might do?
I think they will be in the mix and by in the mix, they will register interest in any free agent that intrigues them, and they will be out there trying to drum up interest in their trade assets. But it takes two to tango. Sometimes it takes three to tango if you're talking about stuff like sign and trades or true stars who can say things like Derek Harper, he was not a true star, but I don't want to. You go play in Utah. If they probably have a package that if a Giannis or a Luka or a fill in the blank would really want it out, that should interest Milwaukee or Dallas respectively. But if Giannis or Luka said, "Oh, I don't want to go there," they'd probably honor that. Maybe not, because we did see, like I mentioned earlier, we did see Donovan get traded somewhere he wasn't dying to go. We did see the same thing happen to Dame last year. So they'll do that. And like I said, this is just a gut read. When I heard Danny Ainge say, if we don't get the guy in July, then we might have to change that plan, it felt to me like that might become more of an urgent plan than let's wait until February and see where we're sitting. Like, maybe it would become a higher priority to, I won't even say try to lose, because I don't think they will. Players never do. Coaches very, very, very seldom do. I can think of a few examples. There was a, I think it was the last game where there was a completely challengeable call, and the player was telling Will Hardy, "Yeah, come on, let's challenge that." And Will's like, "I'm not challenging that."
No, it was like the last game.
yeah. The Golden State game. I think it was Bryce was like, "Challenge that," and he's like, "I'm not challenging that." Right. So I mean, but that didn't mean he was overtly trying to lose, but he was just like, "Hey, we're just we'll take the L here. It's okay." So players never want to lose. Coaches very, very seldom are really actively trying to torpedo their team's chances. But I do think, if you play one or two or three of whatever rookies they end up with this year, I don't know how many that'll be. If they're playing one or two or three of their second year players now, you're going to get some losses. Even if I know what you're saying about, Taylor had some moments and Bryce had his moments, especially offensively, and Keontae had his moments. But if you were really playing, if you have three rookies and three second year guys and you're playing those a healthy amount, you're going to lose some games, and you're going to chalk it up to development, and that's fine. But you're not going to probably accidentally find yourself at the 15th pick. You're going to be probably more in the range we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, they do have the draft coming up. Danny Ainge kind of mentioned they don't really want to go into the season with just a bunch, like 6 rookies, well, 3 sophomores, 3 rookies, because they have 3 picks in this upcoming draft. I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit. So draft night's coming up, and one thing we can be sure about is we're going to hear rumors about the Jazz trying to trade up or use their picks to try to package for something, unless they win the lottery. The lottery's in 10 days. Who knows? Maybe they win the lottery, but chances, I know that, the Jazz have, I think Tony Jones has mentioned this, that they have some guys that they really like. How does a trade in draft night work? Just in general, maybe you can explain. Like, let's say the Jazz want to move from 8. They don't win the lottery, but they want to move up to like 6. Uh, do they have? Is there any sort of salary things they have to take into account, or can they do picks straight up? If they wanted to trade a player, can they?
Yeah, if it's just draft picks changing hands before or after the draft, before or after the selection is made, there are no salary implications at all. Not until players are signed do they then have a salary that you have to worry about in a trade. As far as players moving hands on draft day or before, yeah, the Jazz would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 players that have guaranteed salary that they could move, and they have 3 other players with non-guaranteed salary that they could move, but they wouldn't count in the trade as salary going out unless they guaranteed some of that salary ahead of time. So if they traded Kenneth Lofton Jr., for example, his 2.1 million wouldn't count in the calculation outgoing for the Jazz, but the other team would have to count it as incoming salary on their end. So those players can be traded. Those 9 players that are under contract, 6 guaranteed, 3 non-guaranteed. But you can't trade. You can't do any kind of sign and trade or anything because July hasn't come, and you can't sign and trade Talen Horton-Tucker in June. But what we see a lot of teams do is they arrange the deal and they do those sign and trades or those deals that have to wait until July. They do the handshake. They make the promises. They make the picks for other teams. Whatever. Everybody puts on the wrong stupid Jazz or draft hat. And then
like Donovan wearing a Nuggets hat.
Yeah, exactly. Donovan and Rudy both wearing Nuggets hats, and they never play a game for the Nuggets. So, they can work all that out. But so it's really, that's just timing. I mean, you can make the trade at the draft, even though the trade will have a stamp on it later that says July 6th was the day the trade was made, and everybody knows. And usually it's the league won't announce the trade, but ESPN's already talking about it on the loudspeaker, saying, "Oh, I hear he's not going there. He's going to the other team." So yeah, it's pretty much open. The thing that's harder to do, you can't do the sign and trades if that's even an option. And I don't think that's probably a big deal for the Jazz this year. They don't have a lot of free agents that are probably going to be in sign and trade conversations. You can't do sign and trades then because you can't be negotiating with, you're not going to be signing your players, and that's where teams have gotten into losing some draft picks by doing some funky negotiations too early. That happens every single year. Every single team does it, but you can't be dumb enough to actually make it obvious in the media that you did it.
Actually, that brings it up, and these are just, let's say Plan D rolls around and things go crazy. Can the Jazz sign and trade Lauri if they wanted to? Is that something they could do, or is it because he's not renegotiated yet that they couldn't? I'm not quite sure how that would work.
I am 99% sure what I'm about to say is accurate so the only way they can trade Lauri this summer is trade him at his current salary of $18 million, or renegotiate and extend him and then wait 6 months, because they would be giving him such a raise that they couldn't trade him at the higher salary for that period of time.
Oh, okay. So that's good to know. So it would be at the 18 million. That is what it would be at if they traded him. What's the deadline to renegotiate for Lauri? Can they do it any time this season? I mean, you mentioned February. I mean, is there like a cutoff that they have to do it by if they want to?
So the first one I talked about, that just the extension on his current salary that they're not going to do because Lauri doesn't want it. That one they could have already done last summer. Mm-hmm. But the renegotiate and extend, they can't do until the 3rd anniversary of the day he actually signed the contract with Cleveland. And technically, I think he signed it with Chicago in a sign and trade. But anyway, I'm getting into the weeds here. So yeah. August 6th is the first day he can do the renegotiate and extend and sign that. So that means he couldn't be traded until February 6th. So there would be a very short window there. I don't know when the trade deadline is next year, but I think there would be time that they could trade him before the deadline, but the only way to trade him this offseason is if he's only 18 million in outgoing salary. And by the
Okay.
way, if they said Lauri's available and he's only making 18 million, every team in the league should be showing up to say, yeah, we'll pay that guy 18 million. Well,
Oh, well, I
yeah.
mean, that's what makes him. I mean, that, like I said, I think the thing that they're going to do is they're going to re-sign him, and I do think Danny's the type that would probably, if Lowry loves it here and he's got the pain tolerance, that's the best case scenario, because then
Mhm.
you can have him, and then hopefully you get lucky in the lottery, and then you start adding pieces, and that feels to me like, best case scenario, because it's kind of what he did over in Boston. He had Paul Pierce, and then he was able to add other players and so on. So that's what I think they'll probably do. But
Yeah, one
what
other
were you
thing
gonna
I'll add, because I forgot to give you the back end deadline. They would have to do the renegotiate and extend by March 1st or maybe February 28th. I don't remember but but if they do it at all, it's going to happen in August.
Oh, I
They'll,
see. So that would be in 2025.
yeah,
Mark.
yeah.
Okay.
He's eligible to do a renegotiate and extend anytime from August 6th, which is the 3-year anniversary of signing his contract, and March 1st, which is the last date you can do a renegotiation. But if they're doing it, they're going to do it in August, and they're going to start the season that way. Well, because of the minimum salary, they would need to get it on the books anyway before the season starts.
Well, see, now you got me wondering. I'm like, well, so we have the lottery is in 10 days. And
Yeah,
then I can't remember what is the date for the NBA draft. I believe it's in June.
I've got it here.
Because I'm just kind of, let's see. The first round of the NBA draft will be, let's see,
The 26th.
of June.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's going to be interesting. I guess there's just like certain dates that we will see. I just do think this offseason is going to be interesting, because it literally, I just think anything could happen. That's basically what Danny said. They're going to try to go big game hunting. They're going to talk about Lauri Markkanen. They actually, another interesting moment in that press conference was when they asked him about the Lauri Markkanen contract, and he did not say anything. And and that's just good negotiating, because they're not going to want to lay all their cards out. And they know things that we don't. There may be things that they know, and maybe they already have planned. They may have a contract already kind of figured out, and we don't even know.
Right.
But anyways, it's going to be interesting because we have the lottery coming up. That's going to be interesting. The Jazz will then go through the draft, possibly having 3 players. And then after that, I assume that they will want to go through that scenario. When is free agency open for Utah actually in the summer? Sorry, I'm just asking you these random questions.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So they can start negotiating on June 30th, start signing on July 6th.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. I should know July, because that's the famous Gordon Hayward.
4th of July, barbecue ruined.
Well, all right. So this has been fantastic. I really appreciate it, because I feel like Lauri Markkanen is kind of the hub of everything. Kind of what happens with him is what's really going to dictate. Like you said, if there is an offer out there, and let's say Giannis just says, I hate this place, I want out of here, but he's got a few years left on his deal, Utah probably could beat him. I mean, he may not be super happy. I mean, we've heard about Damian Lillard. The Bucks did that, and they got Damian Lillard. There's a lot of rumors out there he's not super happy in Milwaukee, but
Yeah.
he's still playing.
Yeah.
So,
I don't, obviously I have no inside knowledge anywhere, less than anything in Milwaukee, but I know last year they felt like they had to go get Dame or somebody to make Giannis happy, and that hasn't worked out well. And now you got at least 2 guys on that team, Chris Middleton and Lopez, that are a little older. So, at some point, Milwaukee has to look itself in the mirror and say, are we really going to keep being, does this group, do we stay a contender if we run this back another year? They probably, this year they have some ways they can postpone that decision, because they can say, well, we didn't have Giannis. That was part of the reason. Okay, well, but I'll tell you, if I were, I mean, I'm not in their front office, so it's a lot easier for me to say this. I'm a guy who would hopefully benefit from this, but I'm like, how many times are you going to roll back Chris Middleton, Brooke Lopez, Dame Lillard, that's an aging group, and Giannis isn't as aging, and how many more times is he going to have the patience to say, yeah, maybe this time will be different. I know it was once. They won a championship, but how many more times is he going to say, yeah, this is good enough for me?
Well, and I guess I just want your opinion. So let's say that happens. This is just, hey, we have a chance for Giannis. We're going to go after him. They're probably going to renegotiate Lauri Markkanen at that point, as long as they don't have to give him up. And they're going to trade for Giannis so they can trade contracts for him. How good are the Jazz at that point? Let's say they trade their young guys, they trade Keontae, they trade Taylor Hendricks, and then they bring in Giannis. I guess it's a two-part question. What could they bring in in that scenario? Would they even have space to bring in Cap, or are they going to be kind of like the Phoenix Suns? Or would they be able to go out and get some free agents that they could kind of fill in the gaps around, Giannis and Lowry?
I would imagine they would have to trade out, even though they have cap space. I don't know that they'd try to pull him all the way into cap space. I guess it would depend on Milwaukee too. I mean, could you send John Collins out in that deal to partially offset the fact that you're bringing in all this money? You'd have to send something out. Plus, then you'd have to send out whatever the Bucks wanted. I personally think they probably wouldn't do that if they wouldn't send out Lowry to get Giannis, because then Giannis is a better player than Lowry, but they're close enough that, are you really improving yourself measurably in that process? And would Giannis want to come here if the best player on this team wasn't going to be here? So, for that thought exercise, I would say you'd probably be left with Giannis, Lowry, and some of the younger guys, because they're not going to take everybody. They're gonna pick and choose. I guarantee you, there's one or two of those guys that just for whatever reason they don't think is a good fit for them for whatever reason. They don't want all three of Keontae, Taylor, and Bryce, because they think, oh, well, this guy's great and this guy's okay, but this guy will,
Mm-hmm.
So they'll pick and choose, and they'll take a bevy of picks and whatever, and then you're filling in. The Jazz would still have some room. I mean, without going through all the math on this, I think they would still have some room to use an exception or something. They wouldn't be in apron territory at that point for sure. So they'd have some room to add some pieces around the edges, and then they go to next year, see how they do this year, go to next year's draft. I doubt they would be completely traded out of next year's draft, because I doubt they'd give up all three picks in 2025, unless Milwaukee just said that was the price. And
Mm-hmm.
we want the picks in this draft that we think is going to be awesome. So, there's
And can
so many
well, I was going to say,
ways it could go.
and because the Jazz, I mean, I guess if two teams jump them, they could still convey the pick this year, but more than likely, they're going to be owing their pick to Oklahoma City again next year, unless they're in the bottom 10. Can they even trade that pick? Can't they not trade next year's their own pick at least?
They can't outright trade their own pick. They could, because it may belong to
Okay.
OKC. First of all, also 3 teams would have to pass the Jazz to push
Oh, is
them
it?
down
Yeah.
to
So it's
the
very
Yeah,
unlikely.
it's sometimes hard to think when you see 0.4%. You're like, there's still a chance. Oh no, that's 4 out of 1,000 chances. Like
Yeah.
literally in the lottery, there are 1,000 chances, and only 4 of those chances would have the Jazz conveying that pick. Okay, so back to your question. Um, they could trade their pick in a way that they say, we'll trade you our 2025 pick unless we don't have it, in which case we'll substitute. And then they negotiate what is the substitute. And if it's not the 2025 pick, then we'll substitute either the better of Cleveland or Minnesota, or we'll substitute the 26 pick, or we'll substitute, so they just have to have the language in there to say, but they can trade. Um, they can trade one additional 2025 pick right now, because that would leave them with 2, but one of those would be earmarked for OKC. So they would have to keep the third one. So,
Mhm.
but they have flexibility to trade picks in 2025, even with that debt outstanding.
Well, you know what, Ken, this was fantastic. I'm gonna just like bookmark this, and anyone who has questions about anything, I'm just gonna be like, listen to this. So I really appreciate it. This was fantastic. You guys, if you aren't reading Salt City Hoops and listening to Ken and Dan and reading all their stuff, and I think it's the Salt City 7 and things like that, great stuff that's going on over there. Thank you, Ken, for coming on. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or something that you feel like we should have covered?
Nope. I just that was the main stuff of the list you sent me. That was the main stuff I was prepared for, so I'm golden.
Well, and I didn't want to get too out there and
Yeah.
the weeds, but thanks for coming on. It's going to be an exciting off season. I think honestly anything could happen, and obviously we'll all be just watching it together. So hey, thanks, Ken.
Thanks for having me.